what would you normally build a bridge for? It would be because you're building over something. That would either be a railway, a waterway. If you don't have to build over anything, there'd be no need to build that bridge. Historically, I cannot find any records for there ever being a waterway or a railway track going into the Nove. Some local historians will probably be screaming at the telly saying, well, there's construction photos, how do you explain stuff like this? Well, like with the Verne and any other pictures that I've ever seen and have ever claimed, yeah, the building of these structures. For example, look at the bricks here. This is modern renovation, and if you go into the Nove, you can see there's lots of added on red brickwork at the top, and I suspect that's probably just that. None of these, and the same goes for the Verne, with any of the pictures that claim to be. I have got them. I will bring them up in a sec after this. Any of the pictures that claim to be the Verne being built are exactly the same. To me, it looks more like a lot of it looks more like deconstruction. None of it shows the process from start to finish ever. When I lived in Bournemouth, I sent a few emails out to, I believe it was 5 different churches, asking if they had any photos of when the church was built, any construction photos. And every single church come back to me with the same answer, saying no, we don't have them, and referred me to online forums, online galleries that I'd already seen. I say you can get away with maybe 1 or 2 of these places not having the photos to back them up, but for all of them not to have it, I think you have to really start asking questions. And I say it's not a criticism of the local historians. They probably never even thought of it, but they are serious questions that when you delve into these things, you realise that there's something not quite right. So going back to the evolution of the water wheel. So in 1500 years, you've gone from this to this. Alright, it's been a while. So this is a follow-up video to one I did about a year ago, asking what are star forts, what were they originally built for, and I showed you how they are connected to all the waterways, and how the key to working out what they were or what they did is definitely water. And what evidence is there, or what evidence is left to prove this as well. And in this video, I want to show you more evidence of that. Let's have a look at how power is generated today. So it's produced in a power plant, so these days it's probably more likely nuclear power plants. But once upon a time it was gas, oil. I'm pretty sure there are still power stations, well, I know there are power stations that still do it this way. You obviously got solar as well. But the key to this is the power plant. That's where it all starts. And that's where they make, well, in modern day, this is how they make all their money. So, Watermills. I won't read the whole page because I'm pretty sure most people know what a watermill is. But a watermill is a mill that uses hydropower, so harnesses power from the water. And the reason I wanted to show you this is just to quote the time frame. So the earliest evidence of a water-driven wheel appears to be in a technical treatise. I'm not even going to try and pronounce those Greek names, but around 280 to 220 BC. So they've been around from the dawn of time on their timeline, getting on for 2,000 years. And as I'll explain in a minute, I think this is where I won't be going into detail in this video with the timeline shenanigans, but I think this is where the 1,000 years that's been added into the calendar comes into play a little bit. But think of it logically. So this is what they call the breech shot water wheel, and are alleging that it's from the 3rd century AD. So by my maths, that's over 1,700 years ago. So realistically, evolution-wise, how far do you think realistically you'd come with a water wheel, technology-wise? Because I'm pretty sure you wouldn't go from that to what they claim are water wheels like in the 17 and 1800s, because they're not a lot different. And this is where the reset comes in, and I'll try my best to explain what I mean and where I'm going with this. So yeah, are you going from this in the 3rd century AD to these type mills 1,500 years? So technology wise and how they've evolved over 1,500 years has gone from that to this. You can't seriously be expected to believe that, surely. So it's either one of a few things, or a combination of a few things. As I mentioned earlier, I think you've got however many years they've added onto the calendar. I think there definitely has been some added on. I mean, you've got the Dark Ages. A lot of people suggest and have evidence to prove that that never existed. And it's a very convenient way to buy yourself. If you put something back in time, which is what they do, millions of years, thousands of years, it's not so interesting to people, and it's just harder to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And there's been a huge reset. So this is what I mean. So you've got that water wheel I showed you from the 3rd century, and 1,500 years later you've almost got exactly the same watermills. So somewhere along the line you've gone back to primitive times, haven't you? There's been a reset somewhere. I think there's probably been several. I mean, I don't want to go too deep into naming dates because it's very tricky, but I think the main destruction went on whenever the civil wars went on across the world in, well, they claim in the 1600s, but again, a lot of these dates are up for debate. But if you look at the official narrative history-wise, you had civil wars consecutively in almost every country across the world. I'm pretty sure that's a very big clue to when the main destruction went on. is a mill local-ish to me. I haven't been to it, to be fair, but it's one that I came across on my research, and I just wanted to sort of give you an idea of how these mills worked and the process. I believe this is a flour making mill, but I'll give you a little bit of the history, and this guy would do it a lot more justice than me.
Roughly how long has this mill been here on the side of this river?
As far as we're aware, the mill has been here for 999 years at the moment. It was given to the Abbot of Glastonbury by King Edmund Ironside in 1016. So we're pretty sure that the King of Wessex wouldn't have given one of the richest abbeys in the country a load of old peasant huts. So I'm pretty sure, and others agree with me, that there would have been a manor house here and the mill and so on. And it's certainly verified by the Domesday Book some 70 years later.
Well, this is an absolutely massive, massive body of water. And of course, the River Stour, over the years, it's been used so many times in so many different ways. Milling, one of the main industries here for a long time, though, along these riverbanks. The big question is, with such a huge force of water, particularly when you get weather like we have at the moment, how do you build a mill that will withstand it? How does it actually all work?
Well, building a mill was, I suppose, something of a mystery, really. One has to remember that the mill's been here for certainly over 1,000 years, and how on earth they managed to dam this force of water in those days with none of the modern mechanics that we have is open to speculation, I think, at the very least. But this is quite a strong flow today, but sometimes it flows much, much stronger than this, and we could even be here up to our necks in water on a very flooded winter day. But the river flows pretty steadily all through the summer. The very fact that it's called the Stour, I believe, means strong, meaning that it was a strong flowing river, and so it went on flowing all through the summertime. This is a 2-ton flywheel here, and that kept everything working at a nice steady pace, and of course that improved the output of the mill.
Well, I think, Peter, there's a lot of mechanics going on, a lot of engineering going on, and I think the best thing is probably to see it actually fire up, and then we can run through it as it comes up through and all the different systems kick into action.
Yes, OK, so it only takes a couple of minutes, so let's get going. Let's give that a try. Couple more turns. We're off.
Well, Peter, it looked as though you did that more by eye than anything.
Yes, that's right. It depends entirely on the levels of the water. Normally I give it about 25, 26 turns, and then I feel it stiffen up. And at that stage I give it about another 7 turns, and away we go.
So judging the volume to create the amount of power that you require, that's really just something you learn, you just by experience?
Yes, what I've been doing is lifting a sluice gate at the very back of the mill there, and that allows water to come into the turbine, and the more water you let into the turbine, the quicker it'll go, or the more power you're producing. And so normally for a steady tick over like this, it gives, as I say, about 20 to 30 turns.
Now, as you said, the turbine is on the level, really. How does the turbine work?
Basically, the water comes through from the back of the mill, where there's a head of about 5 feet. that causes water pressure low down underneath our feet here. And so as I turn this wheel, I'm lifting a sluice gate. Water pressure behind the sluice gate forces its way through, swirls around in a huge casing, and as it swirls around in the casing, it's like making an artificial whirlpool. And inside the middle of this whirlpool are blades, and as the water swirls round, it pushes the blades round, and that's what drives the mill.
And we can see the power coming up through now. And then, as you said, you started to describe the crown wheel and pinion up there, a bit like a diff, really.
That's right, and that's driving a shaft which goes through to the far end of the mill, which in turn drives some hammer mills through there. And then the main shaft is extended further up through. It disappears up through the ceiling here, and there's another crown wheel above, just like a diff, as you say, and that drives a lay shaft, which in turn drives a lot more machinery on the next floor.
There's a heck of a lot to explore. We will go and have a quick look.
Bore you with too much detail, but that's the basic mechanics of this particular watermill, and I'm pretty sure most watermills work in a similar basis. But this is the part of this particular video that I had a total ding moment, and it was one of those moments which you don't get very often, but I think it puts everything together. But have a watch of this and how they hoist the sacks up and what it looks similar to.
Right, and we use the water power.
I apologise about the quality here, by the way. I'm just screen recording it, so yeah, and it will only be this particular part.
To run the mill and to hoist our sacks.
Let's go and have a look. Well, the sacks coming in, I mean, they're no mean weight themselves, and to lug them in's bad enough. But how on earth are we going to move these around the building, Peter?
Well, as you say, the sacks were enormous. This is a typical sack from the old days, and it was often called a 2 1/4 sack because it held 2 1/4 hundredweights. Bringing that a little bit more up to date, that was 18 stones or 114 kilos. And that makes it something in the region of 4.5 times what you're allowed to lift in the workplace these days. So these sacks were brought in from a wagon outside on the miller's back, brought in here, but they had to go to the top of the mill. The mill worked on the principle that you balanced the power from the water against gravity. So the power from the water operated the machinery and did the lifting for you. Gravity dropped everything back down again. So these sacks had to go right to the top of the mill.
It's amazing because the whole structure is working literally from top to bottom on gravity.
Yes, that's correct. And so all the miller had to do was to pull down on this cord, and we get a chain, and we do that. So we get a loop. Here we have a sack. The loop goes around the neck of the sack, pulls up tight, and then all we do is pull down on that again. And away goes the sack.
That is absolutely amazing. I can't believe, and you're doing the same movement, but one's long and one's short. I can't.
And this is where I had the ding moment. I thought, oh my God, this is exactly the same as what it's like in all these forts. So on each level, you've got a circle in the roof, and it's obviously to bring up goods, whatever they were hauling, whatever they were doing in these forts.
Wait to see how that works. I think what we're going to do is we're going to explore this right at the top of the mill. So let's move on to see as it comes down on its first trip round, and we'll work our way up through the floors, I think.
Okay, we'll do just that.
So to try and give you an idea of what I mean, This is some pictures I took from the No Fort, which is in Weymouth, Dorset, and this is what they allege is the hoist for the bullet casings and the shell hoists. And I'm not disputing that they possibly got repurposed into these, but again, a lot of these things are questionable. I mean, the same story for almost every fort in every single country. It's not every single one, but a very, very large percentage of them was they were built because of the threat of Napoleon or war or civil war, whatever story it is in that country, and they were never used. Again, you just would not build these elaborate places, and you would not, for strategic purposes as well, have all these narrow corridors where you can't even fit two people going past each other. I mean, it just would not make sense at all in a military complex. You've got to haul all these big machines and bullet casings around. Why would you make all the corridors so narrow? And it just does not make sense, but it does make sense for something else, which I will delve into.
Oh wow.
Oh, what? Does that go all the way out?
Yeah.
This is an old walkway, you can tell, can't you? This bit here. Yeah, it's like ceramic tiles. Yeah, I think this is where someone was going on about it gets too narrow. So what you saw there was my terrible footage of going into the same culvert that these guys have gone into. And one of the things that it's triggered, and one of the things that's clicked together, is what these culverts look like inside. So I'll play the video for you.
No, that's alright. It's deep, but it's not that bad. If you put your foot on it. You want to put your foot on that for you? There you go. Not bad, Evan. Yeah. Which way are you going? I don't know. Well, I'm not ducking under that way, so I guess it's this way, boys.
So yeah, if I stop it here, what does that look like? To me, it looks exactly the same as the corridors that you see in all these forts. Look at the way the walls arch outwards, so they go slightly wider as you go higher, and you've got a narrow floor. Exactly what culverts are like. Exactly how you would build a culvert, because that's the way the technology and the way the infrastructure has always been built. It makes more sense to build a structure like this for water than it would for military purposes, where you've got hundreds of soldiers, staff, army personnel walking through these narrow corridors where not even two people can get by each other. I say, not to mention all the weapons and huge items, machinery and stuff that they would have to haul down there. Why would you build the corridors so narrow, so you wouldn't be able to? It'd just be difficult it would be very difficult to haul everything around. Structures, amazing structures, would be a pinprick on these cities. This would be roughly about the size of one of those forts. Probably fit inside one of those triangles. So think how long it would take to build all of this, taking in comparison how long it would probably take to build just one of these structures. And were they originally for military purposes, or was it for something else? So this is Fort Brockhurst in the Portsmouth area that I visited a while back. And as I mentioned, this one has still got the moat intact. It is an amazing place, and somewhere kind of come across by accident going to look at another place. But yeah, it's one of the only ones where the moat is still intact. And you've got to ask yourself, I mean, this isn't unique to Southampton, Portsmouth. Where did all this water go? All the forts that were built over, destroyed, whatever. Where did all this water go? Because as I say, if you look at the majority of these forts, the water's not there anymore. So I better give you a brief history of the Nove, considering I've been talking about it a lot. So it's based in Weymouth. It was allegedly built between 1860 and 1872. Like all these forts, it was largely supposedly, allegedly built by convict labour, and it is very closely connected to, you may have heard of it, Laverne Citadel, which is another star fort which they're letting rot away and waste away like they do with all of them. You can just make out a little point there. It's so sad. This is where I'll be a little bit honest with you. So I've been wanting to do a video like this for a long time. I've lived here a couple of years now, and one of the reasons I moved here was because I knew some of the, well, it wasn't a reason, but one of the things that influenced me moving here was all the history and some of the bits and pieces like Laverne and No Fort, because there is a lot still intact over here, and you can still see a lot of the evidence for the buried buildings or where they've levelled up. I may touch on that later actually. With the, I do think there are buried buildings, but I do also think there's a case where a lot of this stuff is not. It's not buried buildings. It's where they've just levelled up, or I think they've buried where they have literally buried the buildings by building stuff on top of it. Not what you think as in mud floods. Yes, there is, like I've mentioned in previous videos and alluded to previously in the video, all these forts and similar structures had water in them, and most of them don't have water in them now. So where does all that water go? It had to go somewhere, and I think a lot of it went on the towns and communities around these places. So anyway, I'm going off track a little bit, but I've been a little bit scared to do this video for a couple of years, because you've obviously got an official narrative. You've got, like in every town and city, local historians who are very passionate about what they do, passionate about and it's not a criticism to them, but a lot of them are just, no disrespect, just repeating stuff that other people have done, and they're not looking at the anomalies that we look at. And I've been scared to do this video for a couple of years, because you've got to be really accurate on your stuff, and I don't feel I've had enough evidence yet to come out and say anything and start questioning some of the stuff in Weymouth and Portland. But there is one question that I hope some of the local historians pick up on, which I'm going to show you in a minute, where I think it proves that the history, well, it's a question that needs answering anyway, and I think it proves the history that they're trying to portray on the local community here is false, and it's proven as false with what I'm just about to point out. So I'm going to zoom in to right where the nave is now, to a part here, so it's just outside the gates, and I'm going to ask a question. When you build a bridge, what would you normally build a bridge for? It would be because you're building over something. That would either be a railway, a waterway. If you don't have to build over anything, there'll be no need to build that bridge. So say for example, there was a hill here, and you just wanted to cut through the hill, so you've got a clearing to come through to the gates here. You just leave that clearing free, wouldn't you? Why would you need to build a bridge if? But you would need to build a bridge if you had a railway or a waterway that was, if there was historically a waterway or railway there. Now, if you look at the official history and the maps. I'm just going to go to a side-by-side map here. I believe this is 1888, this map. So just as comparison, and there was an old railway along this pier here, and you can see it here. So if you look on your left, on the left side, sorry, because you will see cursors on both sides. If you look on the left side here, where the cursor is, there's a railway there, and there was a railway that went all along the pier. Definitely don't have that here. That's a pathway. That's not the same. So you don't have any waterway going through there. There's no historically, I cannot find any records for there ever being a waterway or a railway track going into the Nove. So you have to ask yourself, why did they build that bridge? If you look, sorry, took some more footage. You can tell it's very similar cutting wise to how you do like a cutting for a rail track. Like I mentioned, like, why look at how much grass is at the top of that. It's like about 1.5 feet. Why even bother leaving it there? So they would have made the cutting through here, you can tell, and obviously the hill's a bit bigger here. So unless you were planning on having a rail underneath, a rail running along here, or a waterway going through here, there would be no reason whatsoever to leave that small bit of grass up the top there and build this humongous tunnel bridge that would take, it'd just be totally unnecessary. But it wouldn't be unnecessary if it was an old waterway, or if you were planning on directing water into there or out of there. Look inside this tunnel as well. What's it very similar to? So you've got narrow at the bottom and it goes wider. Exactly how a culvert tunnel would be. And again, the really obvious question. But if you're building this for military purposes, surely you build that bridge a little bit wider, considering you've got to bring things in and out of there. It would just make things awkward. Are you more likely to build that for water purposes, or are you more likely to build that for military purposes, considering you've got to bring machinery, weapons, all sorts of stuff in there? What makes more sense? So if I stop it there, that's a hole for a pipe to come out, drainage. Why would it have drainage onto here? Could it possibly be because it's being diverted into the culvert? Hole for another pipe. I think there is actually a pipe in that one still. And you can tell this is for a waterway. I think they claim that to be like a weapons store or something like that, or ammunition store, an old ammunition store. That's the official narrative. But again, like, why do you need to build that bridge? Go back again. Why do you need to build it if you hadn't have to build over anything? Just leave the cutting, cut the grass out of the way. Just leave a gap there. Some local historians will probably be screaming at the telly saying, well, there's construction photos, how do you explain stuff like this? Well, like with the Verne and any other pictures that I've ever seen and have ever claimed to be building or the building of these structures. For example, look at the bricks here. This is modern renovation, and if you go into the nave, you can see there's lots of added on red brickwork at the top, and I suspect that's probably just that. None of these, and the same goes for the Verne with any of the pictures that claim to be. I have got them. I will bring them up in a sec after this. Any of the pictures that claim to be the Verne being built are exactly the same. To me, it looks more like a lot of it looks more like deconstruction. None of it shows the process from start to finish ever. You never ever have any of these photos showing the construction from start to finish in any of these. Not one. But you go to any modern construction, you can find those photos because obviously that's when they were built. Like if you go to modern, I don't know, for example, you've got the Wessex Way in Bournemouth. If you look up the photos, you can see the construction from start to finish. Now, why can't you see the construction from start to finish in any of these forts? Not one of them. Not one. And these are the questions that, and as I say, this is why I've been a little bit scared, because you do have in every town and city local historians who are quite militant and will fight you to the death to hold on to what they believe is true. And it says no disrespect to them, but you also do have a massive Mason community in Portland, so they're very militant. And again, I don't feel I've had enough evidence until now to really start questioning any of this, and still now it's I say it's a new subject. This is new. A lot of these things have only come out within the last 5-10 years, but it's obvious to see there is massive anomalies in our history, and it is very obvious to see if you look at things in a new perspective. Sure, some of you will be asking a question, well, were cameras about then? Of course they were. So from the 1840s, they were becoming very popular, and by the end of the 50s they were commercialised. So another question would say, well, only the rich and the well-off would be able to afford them. Oh yeah, maybe. But these people building the so-called forts, obviously the military, there were people behind it and people in charge. I'm pretty sure they would have the latest tech. And if you were the architect designing these amazing structures, wouldn't you want to have a record of your work from start to finish? And I say this is not the case just for forts as well. This is for almost every building pre-1900. I did a little... I sent a few, when I lived in Bournemouth, I sent a few emails out to, I believe it was 5 different churches, asking if they had any photos of when the church was built, any construction photos. And every single church come back to me with the same answer, saying no, we don't have them, and referred me to online forums, online galleries that I'd already seen. I say you can get away with maybe 1 or 2 of these places not having the photos to back them up, but for all of them not to have it, I think you have to really start asking questions. And I say it's not a criticism of the local historians. They probably never even thought of it, but they are serious questions that when you delve into these things, you realise that there's something not quite right. So going back to the evolution of the water wheel. So in 1500 years, you've gone from this to this. Now, as I touched upon in the last part, it really does not make sense that in 1500 years you would, technology wise, this is how far you would have moved forward. So where I'm going with this is, do you possibly think after a period of time they would work out ways, better ways to come up with building mills? For example, do you think they would start thinking about ways of maybe building a mill so the actual architecture is the mill, and building water channels to in certain ways so it would increase the pressure, speed up the water, create more pressure? You can probably understand where I'm going with this. And is there any evidence, which I've shown you already, which suggests that this could be the case? Now with the wheel, I mean, if I'm honest, I'm still undecided on this, and I still think it's out there for debate. But I'm not gonna lie, I had another little ding moment with when I was looking at some of these pictures, which I'll show you in the background of water wheels, and also it reminded me of, I've probably some of you have seen it as well, of all the fun fairs popping up everywhere, all around, largely in America, but they were over here in the UK as well. And a lot of people suggested that they were just getting rid of old machinery that they didn't know what to do with. And one of the things that were popping up a lot were these massive big wheels. Could this be an explanation for where these wheels could have come from? Like I've mentioned, so the evolution of the water wheel, as the decades, centuries go on, surely you would start incorporating these ways and finding better and more efficient, clever ways to build these water mills into structures. I'm certain this is what they would have done. And are these star forts, citadels, structures that on these massive areas, are they the result of this, the evolution of the water mills? And is this where the missing 1500 years of history of the water mill is gone? Because again, it like I've mentioned, would not make sense to build these massive areas that span, some of them are a good 100, 200 square miles at least. It would not make sense to make these places for military purposes, but it would make total sense if you were trying to harness energy, harness the water, and do it the most efficient way possible. And it brings me on to my next point as well, that if you were the powers that be and wanted to monetize energy, find out and try and work out a way of being able to, say, monetize energy and use it for your own benefit and greed, you would have to you would have to destroy these places and wipe them from existence. And is this what we see through the 1800s, the 19th century? I.e., they're just scrambling, well, not scrambling, but trying to work out the best ways of bottling energy. I.e., you've got Edison with the battery. They decided to go over to oil in the end because it was much easier to bottle that and monetize it, and that's why you come away from electricity at the end of 1800s. And again, it brings into question with electricity, and yeah, I don't want to delve too much into that in this particular series or episodes, but essentially anything before 1850 is up for question because the documentation is very scarce. And as I've alluded to, is this why the documentation is scarce? Because they've had to wipe all of this knowledge from history, and as I've touched on in a previous video I've done on this channel, you had all the mental institutions around this time as well in the 1800s, and if anyone, was there a situation where people were questioning this stuff and what have you? And it would be, if you were trying to cover up this stuff and wipe stuff from history, these are the things you'd have to do. And I like to look at things from you have to look at things from the other side, and you think, if you were doing these things and trying to wipe stuff from history, how would you do it? And this is how you would do it. So is a lot of what we're seeing, I did say I'd talk about this earlier, so I didn't want to forget, is what we're seeing with what looks like the buried buildings. And I'm not arguing that there are buried buildings, and I will show examples of that to reiterate. I'm not totally saying that some buildings are not buried, because they are. But is a lot of it just levelling up? And I'll show you an example in the background here, and this is Nelson Monument in Liverpool. So as you can see, with the ironwork and the beams, that was clearly about 20 foot lower, and they've just leveled it up. I'll just show you a picture in the background of a starfall. I'm not 100% sure it is. It's a picture by Glena Salomon between 1700 and 1761. When you have a look at quite a lot of these areas on Google Earth now, they're literally unrecognisable. You would never know it was there. Some of them you can see perfectly well, and they're really well preserved. But what would be a really easy way, if you were trying to visually get rid of these, to get rid of the outline? I mean, if you look at the picture you're looking at now, if you just took those bottom two levels out, just built above them, what would you be left with? And do we see examples of what's underneath here? Possibly could be underneath here, which is a red brick and all that sort of stuff, underneath many, if not all, towns and cities in every single country across the world. Regensburg in Germany is a really good example of they've erased the outline from above. I say this is not unique to Regensburg at all. This is everywhere, but it's just quite easy to point out on it because I've got a decent map and you can see it quite clearly because they haven't diverted waterways, which is what they've done with quite a lot of other towns and cities, which you notice if you ever find a bunch of these maps and then have a look on Google Earth. As I said, I think I mentioned before in loads of my videos, look up the Moss collection, and also I believe it's King George collection, Royal collection as well. There's like loads of maps in both of those. But yeah, all you'd have to do, because quite a lot of these where you see the star jagged shaped at the edge, they're like different levels of land, and all you'd have to do is build up like 20, 30, 40 foot, and it would erase the total outline of all of these, of all of the outline. So another little thing I want to touch upon, which I think is important as well, is a lot of these old maps. You'll notice over military areas, they will be blank. So here's the van. Look on the left or right, whatever side. Or on the left hand side, it's blank. And this is the case for most military areas that are in British hands around this time. And it would have been a convenient way to hide it from the public. And you do notice as well with maps around this time in areas where there are these structures, that they don't make it very obvious that the beauty of what they are on the map. And again, a lot of this information is only coming to light recently because you've now got a lot of eyes that can see from above. It's definitely something that's gone through my mind, and it's just little things you notice as you go along the journey. Do we have any other evidence across the world of any of these forts or structures having waterways built into them, or attempting to harness the energy from the water.
Fort Jefferson is a star fort in the Dry Tortugas, west of Key West. Commodore Porter did not believe the area to be suitable for a fort when he was tasked with surveying it. But, for some reason, the government thought otherwise and began alleged construction of the fort. This absolutely stunning fortress is actually the largest brick masonry structure in the Americas, with a total of 16 million bricks. Every single one of these bricks was allegedly brought across the ocean by ship. 16 million heavy bricks were supposedly delivered between 1846 and 1875, with multiple ships sinking along the treacherous route. But the fortress was never completed, nor did it ever see a battle. Fort Jefferson was abandoned in the 1890s and again in 1906, only to be repurposed as a bird sanctuary. Today it is a national park. Something very interesting is that the fort has a unique system of cisterns embedded into its walls. I will read from Wikipedia. In order to support such a large population in an area lacking fresh water, an innovative system of cisterns was built into the walls of the fort. Sand-filled columns were placed at regular intervals in the inner walls, spanning their height from the roof to the foundation. The columns were intended to filter rainwater from the rooftop for long-term storage in a series of underground chambers. However, the rainwater dissolved salts in the sands, where the cisterns had not been made tight, making the water unfit for drinking, but usable for washing and cooking. Only the rainwater runoff stored under the parade ground was fresh for drinking. 2 steam condensers stilled 7,000 gallons of seawater per day during the Civil War. It seems to me this star fort has an elaborate aquatech system that was crudely repurposed as a drinking well by ignorant inheritors.
This is some more footage I took at the Nove Fort in Weymouth. And if you look at the bottom, there's water, and you can clearly see that they are very similar to what you would see in a reservoir, or a modern reservoir. So if many people have ever been in a modern reservoir, but the pillars you get in there are very similar. Portland has literally been destroyed over the years, over the decades, centuries, and this is not unique at all whatsoever to Portland, but it's a great example of how they cover up stuff. So, and I think this again will be similar for other places. The Verne is on top of a hill, so it's the highest point in Portland. So in theory, it would probably be the hardest part to cover up. And if you say I'm zooming over it now, and you can see all the quarry work, and this is a dead giveaway. Anywhere in the world, you will always see where there's, I mean, you just pick any map from the Moss collection or the King George Royal collection, find that area on Google Earth, and within a couple of miles you'll always find a quarry, every time. literally without fail. And I say I've been starting to not question historians, but thrown a few comments in here and there on Facebook, etc. And a lot of people, it's just totally bemused when I bring up the quarrying that's absolutely destroyed Portland. I'll just show you a little video of a recording I did right where I'm showing you now, where this particular quarry is, where I suspect was probably another old star structure of some sort. You've also got to ask the question, look at how symmetrical these places are. So look at the design of all these and look at how symmetrical they are. So this is a map from 1600 of Palmanova in Italy, I believe. So considering the official narrative and what they tell us, i.e. the subject of aviation, when do they tell us we could fly? So we had airships getting popularised in the mid-1800s, and then you had the Wright brothers, which is the early 1900s, with the aeroplane. So how are you building these structures and making them so symmetrical from above, yet the official narrative or the official history tells us we couldn't even fly back then? So are you telling me that they've got some magic device where they can fly up in the air? And again, this is another reason why I believe the powers that be have hidden this from us for so long, because if people worked out what these looked like from above, I think they'd be asking the same questions. And is it only because of the last century that we've realistically, the general public, have been able to see from above, obviously on this timeline, this history timeline? Is that the reason why this information has largely stayed unchallenged? Because you wouldn't get as many people who would notice this stuff. Therefore, people like myself who maybe notice, or people like myself and yourselves who have noticed this stuff now, it was probably only a handful of people that ever noticed this. And we all know the only way information gets out there to the masses is if several people or several different groups, or the information comes from several different sources, and then people start seeing it too. And I think it's only where you've had eyes on it, largely for the last sort of 50, 100 years. But I think the main reason why this information is now becoming available is, let's face it, will be because of the internet, and because people can share this stuff, compare from different countries, from different areas, and people like myself and many others really question how they could have built these in the time period that they say that they've built them in. Because I mean, you can get away with quite a lot of the British ones and ones in America. They've obviously tried to pass them off, and it's largely gone unchallenged because you haven't got any other maps saying otherwise. But when you've got all these European maps from the Mole collection and the King George Royal collection, that clearly show these structures were around from the 1600s and before that, it throws into question, seriously, how did they build these things? This picture is fascinating. So I'm not 100% sure on the date of it. I'm guessing it's late 1800s. So what is this up here? I've still got no answer. I'm absolutely puzzled. I mean, what is it? The jury is out on this one for me, because I literally have no idea. But yeah, does anyone have any ideas? And as I said in my last video as well, if you do know anyone else who is doing this line of research, that thoughts and or found evidence, like evidence that's still around today, suggesting that forts are culverts or part of a hydropower system. Because I think quite a lot of these, like with, for example, with the No Fort, it's probably a small part of the circuit. So that would be probably connected. Maybe that, for example, let's say for argument's sake, maybe the Nove was the filtration part, and then you've got the Verne, which is a few miles away. That was the thing, that was the part of the infrastructure that actually powered it all. And then you've got another part of the fort which would do another job, and altogether it would make up the circuit and the infrastructure.